March 28, 1979, a small malfunction at the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant set off a chain of events that brought the U.S. dangerously close to a nuclear catastrophe. Within hours, half the reactor core had melted. There were no explosions, no mushroom clouds, just a slow-motion disaster playing out quietly in a control room. This is HF Case Files, a series where we look at famous accidents through the lens of human factors, including the design, training, and decision-making issues that set people up to fail. I'm Christine. I'm a human factors engineer with HF Designworks. We help organizations design safer, more effective systems. And if you'd like to learn more about how we can help with your human factors design challenges, check out our website in the description. Today we'll unpack what happened at 3 Mile Island. Let's get into it. Let's start by setting the scene. 3 Mile Island sits on a small strip of land in the middle of the Susquehanna River just outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Back in 1979, it was one of the newest nuclear power facilities in the country, all gleaming pipes, fresh paint, that new reactor smell. On March 28th, the Unit 2 night shift was in the control room surrounded by panels with hundreds of gauges, switches, buttons, flashing lights, the kind of setup that looks like it belongs in a 70s sci-fi movie. It was quiet, a normal shift so far. The operators were just keeping an eye on things, sipping coffee, waiting for the day shift to arrive. Then right around 4 a.m., a small problem popped up in the plant's cooling system. Nothing dramatic, at least not yet, but this small glitch would eventually snowball into a full-blown nuclear emergency. That small problem was in the plant's secondary cooling system. This is the part that works kind of like a car radiator. It expels heat so that the reactor doesn't overheat. The system faltered, and as a result, the temperature and pressure in the main reactor loop started climbing. The plant had a built-in safety response for this. A relief valve at the top of the pressurizer would automatically open, let out some steam, drop the pressure back down to normal, and then close again. Standard safety measure. This time, however, the valve opened and stayed open. It was stuck. That meant that the water that cools the reactor and keeps the fuel from overheating was now quietly escaping. So, as a result, the pressure kept dropping, but with less and less coolant to expel heat, the core started to heat up dangerously. Back in the control room, operators were suddenly hit with a ton of abnormal readings and so many alarms. Multiple alarms, dozens, then hundreds of alarms started going off. In the midst of the chaos, operators noticed something was off. A gauge showed the water level inside the system was rising. So, to avoid overfilling, they slowed the flow from the emergency cooling system, which is actually exactly what they were trained to do. But in reality, the complete opposite was happening. Steam bubbles made it look like it was too full of water, when in reality, it was running dangerously low. Coolant was draining out through the valve that was stuck open. So for the next several hours, the valve stayed stuck open, the coolant kept draining out, and the operators kept working from a completely incorrect picture of what was actually happening. It wasn't until nearly 3 hours later that the operators realized the truth that the relief valve was, in fact, still open. Finally, they closed the backup block valve, which stopped the loss of coolant, but at this point, the damage inside the reactor was already done. Half the reactor core had already melted. The unit was shut down, and the incident became the most serious accident in U.S. commercial nuclear power history. So ultimately, yes, the valve was stuck open, and that's what initially caused the meltdown to happen in the first place. But the real story is why it took nearly 3 hours for the operators in the control room to even figure that out. Let's start with all the alarms, 750 total. In a perfect world, the most critical alarm would rise to the top, front and center, so that you know what needs to be dealt with first. But in this case, every alarm was presented with the same level of urgency. There was no hierarchy. No, this is life or death, and this is just mildly annoying. We call this alarm flooding. It's confusing, overwhelming, and not really informational at all. To make matters worse, the alarms weren't the only part of the interface sending mixed messages. The operators had an indicator light for that relief valve, and when they looked at it, it told them the signal to close the valve had been sent. The thing is, it wasn't showing them whether the valve was actually closed. It's kind of like hitting send on a text message. You've done your part, but that doesn't mean the other person has read it or that it even got through to them. In this case, the light was essentially saying, yep, we told it to close, while the valve itself was still wide open. And here's the kicker. They hadn't been trained to recognize how ambiguous that indicator was or how to confirm the valve's actual position any other way. The official training and diagnostic standards they had simply didn't prepare them for this exact failure. Not only that, but the water level gauge was also lying to the operators. Steam bubbles were making it look like the reactor was too full of water, when in reality, water was leaking out from the open valve. But the training given to the operators over and over and over again was clear: do not overfill the reactor. So, with all this misinformation given to them by the interface, they acted exactly as they'd been trained. They slowed the emergency cooling system. And if you know what's really going on, you can see the irony here. They were trying to prevent what they thought was a dangerous excess of water, but they were actually facilitating a dangerous scarcity of water. And this is where human psychology really kicks in. When we form an initial picture of a problem or a mental model, our brains want to stick with it. It's called confirmation bias. You keep looking for evidence that supports your first conclusion, and you dismiss or downplay any evidence that contradicts it. The operational mental model here was: the valve is closed, the water level is high, and our job is to lower it. Every new piece of data was filtered through that mental model. So for nearly 2.5 hours, the poorly designed interface, the inadequate training of the operators, and the nature of their psychology all worked together to keep the operators focused on fixing the wrong problem, while the real problem was quietly getting worse by the minute. So how could human factors have made a difference here? Well, let's rewind to that first moment the valve got stuck, and imagine the operators had the right tools and information in front of them, starting with the interface. That valve indicator light came on when it was told to open and went off when it was told to close. The catch is, the light going off didn't confirm the valve was actually closed. That design violates a basic human factors rule. The absence of a signal shouldn't be used to mean all good. The display should show the actual status of the valve, not just the last command sent. There, that's better. Now let's fix the alarms. Instead of hundreds of equally loud alarms, a prioritization system could have pushed the most critical warnings to the top and quieted the noise from the bottom. Critical safety alarms should get distinct sounds, colors, and placement so that they stand out, while less urgent ones are quieter altogether. Next is the water level reading. If one gauge is vulnerable to misleading readings from steam bubbles, we ought to add redundancy and cross-checks. This could look like independent sensors using different measuring methods, or logic that flags impossible combinations like water level high and pressure dropping fast, so that the system prompts operators to recheck. And, well, that covers a lot of the system design, but what can we do to help the operators prepare for these kinds of situations in the future? Well, we start with the training. The operators weren't unskilled, they just hadn't seen this particular flavor of disaster before. So we can put them in a simulated drill for these kinds of situations with alarms everywhere, indicators that don't match, and ultimately prepare crews to spot when the textbook rules just don't fit. Finally, we can build in explicit steps to double-check any assumptions directly in the procedures. If a critical component changes state, confirm it with at least 2 independent sources before you act on it. None of these fixes require reinventing nuclear power billion-dollar overhauls. They're actually pretty simple design changes and training updates that make sure when things start to go sideways, the people in the control room have the right information in the right way at the right time, which, is kind of the whole point. And after 3 Mile Island, the nuclear industry did make changes along those lines, but it shouldn't have taken a partial marathon to get there. And that's that on human factors. If you found this breakdown insightful, like and subscribe to stick around for more HF case files, and let us know in the comments what other cases you'd like to see us cover in future episodes. At HF Designworks, this is the kind of work we do every day, reviewing systems, finding hidden risks, making sure people and technology work together safely and efficiently. If you're working on a system that could use a human factors review, check out the links in the description for more information on what we do. And if you want to dig even deeper, our CEO, Scott, co-authored a paper on nuclear power plant regulations, so I'll leave that link down below as well. We'll see you next time on the Human Factors channel. Bye!